In July 1944, advancing Soviet units discovered vast industrial warehouses. They expected military supply depots. Instead of weapons, they found mountains of children's shoes. Soldiers pulled open heavy sliding doors. They saw thousands of everyday objects sorted by material type. One specific detail shattered the industrial uniformity. Suitcases stacked high inside the hangars bore handwritten names. White paint spelled out addresses and birth dates. The victims packed for relocation. The physical infrastructure stood completely intact. The garrison failed to execute demolition orders. Concrete gas chambers remained fully operational. Heavy steel doors featured reinforced hermetic seals. Ventilation shafts retained fresh chemical residue. Blue hydrogen cyanide stains covered the interior walls. Outside, open execution trenches scarred the earth. The damp air carried the dense, sharp odor of unburned bones. Crematorium ovens stood cold but fully loaded with fuel. But the true core of this complex operated inside the administration block. Soviet troops secured the camp archive documents. Investigators opened the ledgers. The paperwork perfectly mirrored standard corporate logistics. Clerks maintained strict shift schedules. Officers tracked daily processing quotas. This mundane administrative routine created a chilling contrast with the concrete slaughterhouses operating just a few hundred meters away. The SS Main Economic and Administrative Office managed genocide like a modern factory production line. Efficiency demanded absolute accountability. Bureaucrats registered incoming prisoner numbers. They assigned work details. They monitored mortality rates to order fresh human cargo. The front collapsed before the administrators could burn the evidence. The captured folders contained perfectly preserved graphs of transport deliveries and daily death schedules. A fully operational extermination complex fell into Allied hands. The captured administrative records belonged to Majdanek. Troops of the Second Belarusian Front secured this facility near Lublin on July 23, 1944. The discovery triggered an immediate geopolitical shock. Soviet forces overtook a mechanized death factory completely intact. Why did the command fail to dismantle this extermination hub? The front line collapsed faster than the sanitization protocols could activate. The Soviet summer offensive moved at unprecedented velocity. Enemy logistics shattered. The rapid breakthrough physically outpaced German directives for infrastructure demolition. Forward detachments expected standard urban ruins and destroyed military depots. Instead, they found a pristine, fully functional conveyor belt of human eradication. The scale defied standard military logic. Camp infrastructure remained perfectly preserved. German garrison units simply abandoned the perimeter. They fled the sector without executing the final demolition orders. The Majdanek infrastructure went online in October 1941. It immediately operated as a central receiving node for a colossal trans-European logistics network. The German state railway system coordinated the transport schedules. Freight trains crossed the continent from France, the Netherlands, and Czechoslovakia. A standard transport comprised 50 enclosed cattle cars. Transit required up to 4 days. No rations, no water. The logistics prioritized strict cargo volume over basic human survival. Locomotives halted at the camp siding. Guards threw open the sliding wooden doors. They unloaded exhausted prisoners directly onto the concrete platform. Officers immediately executed sorting protocols. They directed one fraction toward the industrial sectors to extract forced labor. They sent the remaining fraction straight to the extermination zones. The process demanded absolute mechanical precision. Manual execution pits still functioned nearby, but industrial efficiency dictated the main workflow. The primary chemical tool for mass destruction maximized this efficiency. Guards locked the heavy steel doors. Then came a sharp metallic rattle. Operators poured Zyklon B pellets directly down the roof ventilation shafts. The crystalline granules hit the concrete floor and rapidly vaporized into lethal hydrogen cyanide gas. Asphyxiation occurred within 20 minutes. Camp personnel vented the chambers. Special work details extracted the corpses. The assembly line reset. The administration meticulously documented the output of this mechanized routine. The final operational death toll reached 78,000. Eliminating 78,000 people equals the total erasure of an average European city in just 30 months. Bureaucratic ledgers categorized every victim by origin and status. Polish political prisoners, Soviet soldiers, and resistance members filled the lower columns. But the system tracked its primary demographic with ruthless, exact precision. Inside this specific extermination node, the SS murdered exactly 59,000 Jews. The exposure of 78,000 documented corpses at Majdanek triggered unprecedented panic within the SS High Command. How did the Reich leadership respond to the operational breach in Lublin? Heinrich Himmler immediately activated the protocol for total camp evacuation. Secrecy outranked military survival. The SS diverted trains, guards, and fuel from the collapsing Eastern Front. Hiding the extermination infrastructure became the supreme strategic objective. The state cannibalized its own logistics. Between late 1944 and early 1945, the SS cleared the camp perimeters. Guards forced prisoners onto the winter transit grid on foot. Thousands marched into sub-zero temperatures. No winter gear. No medical supply lines. Single gunshot echoes cracked through the frozen forests. Escorts systematically executed anyone who slowed the operational pace. The forced relocation gridlocked the remaining transport corridors. Marches dragged on for weeks. The system collapsed into open-air execution zones. Thousands of bodies froze along the road shoulders and village perimeters of occupied Europe. The winter death marches of 1945 were a chaotic improvisation. The facilities of Operation Reinhardt were not. Their demolition followed a strict engineering protocol. Sites like Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka lacked the industrial infrastructure for slave labor. Architects designed them for one target metric: immediate extermination. Guards processed and executed most arrivals within hours. By late 1943, the operational phase ended. The erasure phase began. SS engineering units dismantled the grid. Demolition teams rigged the concrete gas chambers with high explosives and leveled the structures to the ground. Heavy excavators tore open the sealed mass graves. Sonderkommando crews hauled decaying corpses to massive railway tie piers. The heavy stench of burning exhumed remains drifted across the occupied Polish territories for miles. Workers ground the remaining ash into fine dust. They mixed it deep into the topsoil. Then came the camouflage protocol. Agricultural specialists oversaw the planting of dense pine forests directly over the pulverized bone layer. To complete the optical illusion, engineers constructed standard civilian farmhouses right on the perimeter. Commanders assigned tractors to former guards. They posed as ordinary farmers living directly on top of the kill zones. The SS annihilated 1,700,000 Jews across these three primary coordinates. As the Soviet vanguard approached, Berlin issued new directives. The Reich High Command diverted trains, fuel, and specialized manpower away from the front line. They redirected all available logistical resources to the total physical concealment of the evidence. Erasing the 1.7 million casualties of Operation Reinhardt bought the SS critical operational time to execute the evacuation of their primary systemic node before the Eastern Front collapsed. On January 27, 1945, advance infantry of the Soviet 60th Army breached the perimeter of Auschwitz. Soldiers pushed through the frozen barbed wire corridors. Inside the unlit barracks, they found abandoned humans, skeletons covered in thin skin. Beside them sat children, twins, teenagers with deep surgical scars, the discarded test subjects of SS medical divisions. What exactly was this facility by January 1945? It was no longer just a detention center. It operated as a massive, punitive conglomerate fully integrated into the German wartime economy. Dead silence hung over the concrete expanse, a crushing quiet inside a gigantic industrial complex engineered for tens of thousands of active workers. The footprint extended far beyond the main gates. More than 40 satellite industrial subcamps operated in the surrounding exclusion zone. The grid functioned as a unified extraction machine. Auschwitz I served as the administrative core. Auschwitz II-Birkenau operated as the high-volume extermination terminal. The third segment, Monowitz, locked the Holocaust directly into the heavy industry of the Reich. This sector supplied slave labor straight to the chemical giant IG Farben, fusing state-sanctioned extermination with synthetic rubber and fuel production. As the front approached, the SS initiated their withdrawal protocol. Guards forced 60,000 prisoners onto the frozen roads toward Germany and Austria. The death marches cleared the primary industrial zones. The SS extracted the remaining functional labor force. They left the defective units behind. When Soviet troops finally secured the entire complex, the exact count of surviving inmates stood at 7,000. The camp administration liquidated 1.1 million people inside this complex. Documenting this vast infrastructure provided absolute proof that Majdanek was a standardized node in a unified extermination network. Soviet troops breached the storage zones. Inside, they found strictly cataloged rows of eyeglasses. Sorting bins overflowed with wooden toothbrushes. Why did a state system need 370,000 worn men's suits? The answer is purely economic. This was the resource reserve of the Third Reich. Soldiers broke the heavy locks on the main warehouse doors. They stepped into the logistics center of a state corporation. While the gas chambers and continuous fire crematoria efficiently processed the biological units, the primary objective of the complex remained sheer resource extraction. Logistics details systematized exactly 7 tons of human hair. Analytically, this volume equates to 140,000 shaved heads. Maintaining this yield required a relentless, unbroken conveyor belt of incoming transports. Further down the sector, supply officers inventoried 800,000 women's dresses. They hung the garments in endless, identical rows. The administration managed the extraction with strict corporate efficiency. The sorting process was sterile, cold, deeply bureaucratic. Guards stripped materials from the living and the dead alike, ensuring no usable physical asset went to waste. Wooden joints and metal hinges clattered onto the inspection tables. The final warehouse ledger recorded the stockpiled prosthetics in the thousands. American military police escorted the civilian population of Weimar through the gates of Buchenwald. The residents claimed total ignorance. The physical data contradicted their statements. Medical wards contained detailed records of surgical experiments. SS doctors operated on living prisoners without anesthesia. Corpses lay stacked across the open sectors. The odor of decomposing tissue saturated the perimeter. The resource extraction model demanded direct integration into the domestic economy. Buchenwald operated exactly 8 kilometers from the center of Weimar. The city functioned as a massive logistical transit hub for the Reich. Rail networks merged. Supply chains intersected. Geography and municipal administration made complete isolation of the local demographic impossible. The government did not conceal the network in remote, occupied territories. The state embedded the infrastructure directly into the national grid. The sites required high-voltage power lines, civilian engineering crews, and continuous heavy rail access. The perimeter fences of the major concentration camps bordered primary German industrial zones. On April 11, 1945, the United States 6th Armored Division breached one of these integrated nodes. The armor columns exposed the sheer administrative scale of the Buchenwald facility. How did the system manage a mass of 250,000 people? Through strict internal hierarchy and constant terror. The architecture here differed from the extermination zones in the east. Buchenwald was not built for mass gassing. It functioned as a bureaucratic engine for forced labor and punitive detention. Established in 1937, the site maintained 8 years of continuous, calculated operation. 280,000 humans passed through this single location. The demographic throughput fed the regional subcamps with prisoners of war, political targets, and minority groups. Biological exhaustion operated as the standard procedure. Facility ledgers documented the exact operational cost.
At least 56,000 individuals died from deliberate starvation, medical experiments, and industrial fatigue. As American forward elements closed the distance, the SS security grid fractured. Camp personnel abandoned their posts. Underground resistance cells immediately initiated a synchronized internal strike. The metallic clank of rifles stripped from the surrendered guards echoed across the assembly square. Starving inmates secured the inner perimeter and seized control of the primary command sectors. While Buchenwald inmates assembled hardware for the military industry,
125,000 prisoners at Gross Rosen in Lower Silesia mined rock. The SS opened the camp in August 1940. The goal was extraction. The Reich required structural materials. Granite from this quarry shipped directly to Berlin. Chief architect Albert Speer demanded massive volumes of stone for his monumental imperial capital projects. Geopolitical ambition dictated the daily quotas. The mechanics relied on biological fuel. Labor functioned as execution. Prisoners wedged steel tools into the solid rock face. They fractured the granite. Men took the harnesses. Heavy stone blocks scraped brutally against the gravel as depleted human units dragged the payload upward by hand. Caloric deficit triggered physical collapse. Muscle fibers tore. An inmate dropped the ropes. Guards executed the fallen worker immediately. The administration slotted a fresh replacement unit into the empty harness. The quarry never stopped. Death remained a calculated operating expense within the economic plan. The registry recorded 40,000 dead. Then the front collapsed. By February 1945, Soviet armor breached Lower Silesia. The SS command initiated immediate evacuation protocols. Guards drove the operational workforce westward on foot. Officers burned the administrative barracks to erase the production logs. The Red Army secured an empty industrial zone. Unmarked mass graves bordered the perimeter. Only the severely damaged units remained inside the wire. The abandoned sick quickly died. 65,000 dead. Stutthof became a terminal dumping ground. The loss of the Gross Rosen quarries and the shattered Eastern Front triggered a massive logistical collapse. Evacuation chains forced thousands north toward Danzig. Where did the system put thousands of witnesses when the front line collapsed? They were sent on death marches to the sea. The facility opened in September 1939. Over 110,000 prisoners passed through its gates. Now, the internal supply lines failed. The Reich had no transport capacity left. Overcrowding ruptured the camp infrastructure. Disease wiped out the remaining workforce. The Red Army was rapidly closing the coastal perimeter. Berlin needed to destroy the demographic evidence before the Soviet armored spearheads locked the sector. The command ordered a tactical erasure. Evacuation shifted to foot columns. Guards drove the surviving prisoners north in sub-zero temperatures. The destination was the Baltic Sea. SS units pushed the exhausted columns directly onto the frozen surface. The ice cracked under their weight. Thousands drowned in the freezing water. Trains that bypassed the Baltic coast redirected their cargo westward. Bergen-Belsen absorbed this biological overflow. The facility was established in 1940 as a prisoner of war transit camp. Its original architectural capacity was 10,000. By 1944, the Eastern Front disintegrated. The Reich's logistical grid collapsed. The camp parameters changed completely. It was no longer a transit hub. It became a terminal dumping ground. Bergen-Belsen was not engineered as an extermination center. There were no gas chambers. The catastrophic death rate was a direct result of transport failure. The collapsing railway network compressed 60,000 evacuated inmates into the remaining infrastructure. Trains arrived without schedule. Guards unsealed the transport wagons. Starving prisoners collapsed directly onto the gravel ramps. Inside the compound, severe overcrowding triggered an uncontrollable biological chain reaction. Epidemic typhus tore through the packed sectors. On April 15, 1945, the British 11th Armored Division intercepted the facility.
The tank crews detected the objective long before establishing visual contact. A suffocating density of typhus and decomposing tissue drifted for miles. The odor penetrated the steel hulls of the armored vehicles. The entire extermination system had crashed under the weight of its own ruined logistics. The British units advanced past the perimeter fences. At the railhead, camp personnel still unloaded sick inmates from the newly arrived freight cars. Underground facilities for V-2 rocket assembly became the terminal phase of industrialized death. The system converted 60,000 inmates into raw engineering consumables. The SS carved the Mittelbau-Dora complex directly into the solid rock of the Konstein Mountain. Damp air hung static. Sharp concrete dust saturated the ventilation shafts. The assembly line never stopped. Prisoners bolted the ballistic chassis together. They collapsed on the bare floor. They slept right beside the heavy metal lathes. Cold iron rocket components rested against a backdrop of emaciated, bruised bodies. The engineering data survived the war. These exact V-2 rockets, built entirely by captive labor, technologically established the baseline for the post-war space race. Lead scientists drafted the trajectory blueprints. The camp administration merely supplied the biological fuel. Mittelbau-Dora did not operate as an isolated anomaly. It functioned as a central node. As Allied armor breached the German interior, reconnaissance units mapped the broader grid. They uncovered hundreds of satellite subcamps hidden inside dense forests, stone quarries, and remote mountain ranges. Standardized rail lines and transit quotas linked every facility. The infrastructure formed a single extraction matrix across the collapsing state. When eastern sectors fell, trains simply reallocated the surviving workforce westward. The logistics network fed the underground factories continuously. The subterranean environment accelerated physical collapse. Caloric intake dropped. Medical intervention did not exist. The final death count for this specific underground operation locked in at 20,000. 13,000 unburied corpses lay exposed across the compound, between the barracks, along the pathways, while underground assembly lines systematically wore human operating units down against steel. Bergen-Belsen achieved mass liquidation through pure infrastructural failure. How do you exterminate tens of thousands of targets without poison or machinery? You simply cut the water lines and halt the supply trucks. The logistics fractured. Prisoner density exceeded the camp's infrastructural capacity by hundreds of %, making biological collapse mathematically inevitable. Barracks designed for 500 units absorbed thousands. Sanitation networks collapsed. The main water pumps failed. Inmates drank from biologically contaminated puddles. Pathogens multiplied rapidly through the dense population. Typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Medical countermeasures did not exist. When British forward units breached the perimeter, they found 60,000 survivors. Most lacked the basic motor function to stand or speak. The biological decay continued long after the gates opened. The final casualty count reached 50,000 dead. The perimeter contained 0 gas chambers. The facility executed its population entirely without specialized industrial hardware. The biological degradation model observed at Bergen-Belsen was not an operational anomaly. It was a standardized economic blueprint. In the stone quarries of Flossenburg and Mauthausen, the Reich weaponized human exhaustion for industrial output. The state converted human life directly into raw materials: granite, armaments, infrastructure. The extraction process demanded constant kinetic output. Prisoners manually transported massive cargo up the sheer face of the quarry, 186 steps. Inmates classified this incline as the stairway of death. The dull thud of heavy granite blocks echoed constantly against the rock. Bureaucratic records designated Mauthausen as a facility for ideological correction. But the actual logistical model dictated a 0% survival rate. The workforce functioned as a highly disposable asset. Flossenburg operated under this exact metric since 1938. The machine required fresh bodies to replace broken ones. As the war economy contracted, the extraction rate accelerated. Operations at Flossenburg systematically expended 30,000 workers. Mauthausen consumed over 90,000 human units. Calculated caloric deficits met maximum physical load. Muscle tissue deteriorated. Bone structures failed. The steep gradient provided no mechanical leverage. Emaciated prisoners collapsed and fell under the sheer weight of the granite blocks. A sun-heated freight train stood abandoned on a railway siding. The steel cars radiated a dense smell of rotting flesh. This entire trans-European network of subterranean factories and quarries grew from a single prototype. The state launched it at Dachau in March 1933. The SS Inspectorate utilized this site as their foundational blueprint. Administrators tested the precise mechanics of mass detention, treating human exhaustion as a strictly measurable industrial metric. They standardized guard rosters. Over the next decade, the bureaucratic machine expanded Dachau into a dense regional network across southern Germany and Austria. The primary facility processed 200,000 prisoners. Registry clerks logged 41,000 dead. These casualties did not stem from spontaneous violence. They were the calculated yield of 12 years of continuous administrative optimization. The infrastructure operated smoothly. Then, the front line collapsed. On the 29th of April, 1945, the 45th Infantry Division intercepted the site. Infantrymen approached the stranded Buchenwald transport. Soldiers shoved the heavy sliding doors aside. 2,000 bodies filled the suffocating boxcars. Prisoners had starved during transit. Past the tracks, the disposal infrastructure remained completely intact. The main crematorium stood untouched. Execution ranges sat empty. Troops breached the main gates. 10 million dead. What was the true size of this infrastructure? Researchers mapped 44,000 objects across Europe. When Allied investigators started systematizing the ledgers seized from Dachau and hundreds of other sectors, local incidents merged into a macroeconomic grid. Military forensic teams initiated a continental audit. They excavated mass graves. They secured German transit manifests. The dry rustle of thousands of seized ledger pages echoed in the briefing rooms. Statisticians interviewed the remaining survivors. They converted human statements into rigid casualty data sets. The accumulated evidence destroyed the myth of isolation. These zones were not hidden anomalies. They were fully integrated into the everyday European economy. Forced labor sites operated alongside civilian agriculture. Major industrial conglomerates like IG Farben and Krupp absorbed these detention centers directly into their production lines. Transit hubs spanned from the French coast to the Polish plains. Investigators cataloged the urban ghettos. They logged the primary extermination centers. They recorded every subcamp attached to a provincial factory. The final cartographic count reached exactly 44,000. The operational logs for all 44,000 infrastructure nodes reached the International Tribunal in November 1945. The Nuremberg trials commenced. Prosecutors bypassed rhetoric. They weaponized logistics. In the center of the courtroom, projectors cast footage of mass graves from the liberated camps directly onto large viewing screens. Defendants deflected responsibility. They cited the chain of command. They claimed they merely executed standard military directives. The defense shattered against the sheer volume of supply manifests and architectural blueprints. These proceedings established an unprecedented mechanism in international law. For the first time, a legal body officially documented the operational framework of a state-engineered death conveyor. It was not a systemic failure. The mass extermination functioned as an official, strictly managed government policy.